Your moment has come in terms of the Green Party. There's no doubt about that. And that momentum has been building for some time. But now the hard graft of actually really implementing and getting green policies adopted, that can be very, very tough. How is the Green Party and how's your group in the European Parliament going to do that?
Well, I think we do it by working effectively on committees. That's in the months ahead. At the moment, we're doing it in the discussion around who leads the European Parliament and who will take charge of the committees. We've actually been working on policy for many months now. Under the list system, there's a bit of flexibility that allows our leaders to work on issues of policy in the run-in to the election, and now to sit down with leaders of the main political groups to try and push an agreement on policy. That may happen or it may not happen. Certainly the discussion over the last few days and weeks has been more about positions than about policies. But we come back time and time again to what action can we take on climate change? What action can we take on transportation, on energy, on housing, on the myriad of issues that are of a concern to the voters who put me into the European Parliament and to people all around Europe.
So let's translate that back for home, Ciarán, because we know the government recently launched its climate action plan. Very ambitious, some people say unrealistic.
Yeah.
Is it possible for those policies to be implemented? Because it's going to need EU-wide effort really to get countries like Ireland to pull their socks up when it comes to implementing these issues.
I think the real challenge at the moment in Ireland is that we've lots of policies but we don't have joined up thinking. So our Taoiseach Leo Varadkar last week did his weekly broadcast. He talked about securing transportation for funding for transportation, and in the next breath the climate mitigation plan. But that transport funding was for the expansion of Dublin Airport, and there is a fundamental mismatch between the policies of further motorway and road building and airport expansion and then trying to keep to our carbon targets. So I think there's much more spin than substance when it comes to tackling climate change at home. And this is a point that we'll come back to over the months ahead of how can we keep in line with our carbon reduction targets and have joined up policies across agriculture, construction, transportation, energy that make sense. And at the moment, there's a real mismatch.
But coming back to that then, Ireland has to grow. You still want the economy to grow. Dublin Airport is jammed up, the roads are jammed up. So how do we get a system where our infrastructure works smoothly, but at the same time we're moving towards a greener infrastructure?
Well, I think the language of being jammed up and congestion is a very 20th century approach to transportation. And I think in this century we tend to look at how can we reduce transport demand? How can we have people living and working in the same place? To take Dublin, where I represent, we've people commuting an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day to get to Dublin. And the solution isn't more transport infrastructure, it's more housing in Dublin City. So we need to think slightly outside the box on this one. And we also need to think about transport investment that doesn't increase emissions. So instead of throwing more roads at the problem, we need public transport, we need walking, we need cycling. So I want to shift that debate within the European Parliament into investment in sustainable mobility rather than more airports and more motorways. And that is a big shift. And I think Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has to think long and hard about whether the investment he's planning is going to reduce our emissions or increase them. And that happens in transport, it happens in agriculture, it happens in all those other sectors.
And are all of those efforts really directly linked now to the European stage? So in other words, the Irish government can't be going off doing its own thing without really understanding the context of those efforts within the European move to try and get us all to reduce our carbon emissions.
Look, I think we have to. And if not, we pay the price. And actually, we're not at the moment, and we will be paying the price of €150 million in fines next year. So the people of Ireland are paying the price for the government's inaction on climate. too much spin, not enough substance. And that's why I'm here, to try and push green policies rather than growth at any cost policies. And that's where we need to see a shift, not just from Fine Gael, but from Fianna Fáil and indeed from other parties that see the mantra of growth as being the only game in town. Sure, we can have growth, but that has to be green growth. And in some areas we need to move towards carbon reduction at the expense of growth. And these are really difficult choices.